It's important to know the way that we can manipulate paths from Illustrator because we can now modify shapes in After Effects similar to the way we modify paths in Illustrator. Let's take a look at comp number 2, Shape Layer Primitive, which is a completely blank composition. Remember, with no layer selected, if I navigate up to the toolbar and then select the vector shapes for either rectangle tool, rounded tool, ellipse tool, polygon, or star, I'll create a shape layer. We'll start with the elliptical tool. I'll click and drag anywhere inside the composition, holding down the Shift key and the Control key to create a perfect circle from the point that I clicked. Much the same way that Illustrator uses its elliptical tool, After Effects now has a tool to create elliptical shapes. And these shapes are contained in a shape layer. When we take a look inside the timeline, we have a contents folder that contains all of the different shapes for this shape layer. The first thing we've drawn is an ellipse, and if we look inside here, we can see that the ellipse has a unique path. By opening up the ellipse path, we see that this is a primitive. By primitive, I mean that the shape is controlled merely by size and position. If we delete the contents here, or delete the entire layer by clicking on the word shape layer, then using backspace or delete, we can create a new shape. With the elliptical tool still selected, I'll just go up to the comp window, then hold down the Alt key or the Option key on the Mac, and click and drag. Rather than creating a primitive, After Effects has created a path shape. If we go back down into the timeline and open up the ellipse, we can see that the shape is defined by a path rather than simply the position and size of the primitive circle. Because we know that this object is defined by a path, and we also know that we can copy and paste paths from Illustrator. So we can navigate back to Illustrator by using Alt-Tab or Command-Tab. Then we'll select our C-worms again, select the layer and the paths, then use Control-C to copy it into the pasteboard, or Command-C on the Mac, then go back to After Effects. With the path selected here in After Effects, we can now paste those shapes into our shape layer. In After Effects CS3, this isn't just for the vertices and paths that we create in Illustrator. If we go back to Illustrator and draw something with the brush, by clicking on the brush tool here, we can paint different shapes. We'll leave the same layer active because we don't need multiple layers. By changing the color in the chip chart here, we'll change the stroke to black. Then, pressing F5 to bring up our brushes, we can choose the charcoal brush. Now you can see along the outside that this brush has a unique shape. Using Control-C or Command-C on the Mac, then switching back to After Effects, we can paste this into the path for our shape layer. So with the same path selected, I'll use Control-V to paste that into my shape. Once we paste it into the path, we see that we have two different paths. It may be a little difficult to see at first glance, but the yellow vertices in our comp window are mask shapes. Because the Illustrator file contained two different paths, one for the inside of the brush stroke and the other for the outside, the shape of the brush, After Effects copied the first path into the path of the shape layer, and the second path was copied down below. So if we go down to our mask shapes, we can see that the mask shapes are here. Some of those mask shapes are overlapping, making it difficult to copy this brush stroke directly into the shape. However, if we change the labels for some of these mask shapes, we can see which ones we can afford to delete. By highlighting masks 7, 6, 5, 4, and 3, we can see that none of those vertices show up. When we get to mask 2, we can see all of those different vertices around the outside of the brush shape. What we're going to do is simply delete masks 3 through 7 by holding down the Shift key and selecting all of those. By deleting those, we see that there are even more mask shapes that were copied and pasted from our brushstroke in Illustrator. All of those other mask shapes define little holes and gaps that might have been found inside that erratic charcoal brush. Again, we'll simply click and then Shift-click to eliminate all of the mask shapes except for masks 1 and 2. Mask 1 is going to be the inside, and mask 2 is going to be the outside. I only want to take mask 2. We'll leave mask 1, which is the gap inside of our curlicue. But I don't want to copy the mask name. What I want to do is copy the mask path. So under the name for mask 2, I'll select the mask path, then use Control-C to copy it. I'll navigate back up to the path for my shape layer, select it, then paste it. Now I can get rid of the masks that are attached to this layer. I'll select both of these and then simply set the value to none. I'll move back up to the path now for my mask shape. Then with my path selected, I'll use the scroll wheel on the mouse to zoom in on the layer, or simply use the period key on the keyboard to zoom in. Now I can see the blue paths from my shape layer and the yellow paths of the mask shape. By changing to the selection tool, I can double-click on any one of the vertices for the blue path, then scale that path up. I'll hold the Shift key to scale it by a greater value. Once it's done, I'll use Alt or Option on the Mac with the / button to fit my composition to the window. Here I can see the new shape layer and the mask shape from which it came. I don't need these masks, so now I'll click and delete those and take a look at just the shape layer. I can continue to change the path or use the transformations to scale this ellipse even further. Here, under the scale, I'll change the value to 500%. Because these transformations are occurring around the transformation's anchor point, it's going to slide the shape off screen. I can either modify the position or slip the anchor point so that the image appears on screen. The beauty of using Illustrator to create all of our shape layer paths is that we have the ability to create these irregular shapes very easily. However, as we'll see, using the shape layers in After Effects is going to allow many more variations for our animation.